Terrain can have a significant impact on combat. This is just common sense. You would expect a defender in woods to have a lot of cover, so they would take fewer losses, while they would probably inflict more on the attacker, and this is in fact the case. When you decide to initiate a combat, you need to know what terrain would come into play and what impact that terrain will have on the battle. When a hex is attacked, the defender looks at which hex sides the attack is coming through. This provides him with the options for selecting defensive terrain, the terrain that will influence the combat. The defender has the option of using the terrain in any of the hex sides an attack comes through, as well as any adjacent hex sides. Let me show this to you graphically. Take a look at this generic hex diagram from the rules. Here you have hex X and hexes A through F for the surrounding hexes, and the hex sides in hex X are 1 through 6. Let's say hex X in this generic diagram is attacked by forces in hex A and B. The attack would then come through hex sides 1 and 2 in this diagram. The defender in hex X could choose to use the terrain in hex sides 1 or 2, as well as the terrain in hex sides 3 or 6, as these are hex sides adjacent to the ones that the attack is coming through. Note that he could not use, in this example, the terrain in hex sides 4 or 5 because they are not adjacent to the hex sides the attack is coming through. The defender can make the choice as to which terrain to use, given his options, because he has wide latitude in picking his defensive positions. And obviously he's going to defend using the most advantageous terrain available to him. Now let's look at hex 2006 on the map. Let's say that this hex is attacked by units only in hex 2107. This arrow would show the direction of this particular attack. In this case, the terrain in the hex side that the attack is coming through is clear, but there is broken terrain in an adjacent hex side. So this is the terrain the defender would probably pick for defense. Note that the defender could not pick the wood in this hex side back here as a defensive terrain. That's because this terrain is not adjacent to the hex side that the attack is coming through. But now let's look at a different case. In this new case, hex 2006 is under attack by forces in hex 2005 and 2106. In this case, the defender could pick woods as the defensive terrain, as the hex side the woods is in is adjacent to a hex side through which the attack is coming. The effects of terrain on combat are shown on the terrain effects chart, which is found on the back side of most of the rule books. Let's look at it again here. Here's a list of the different terrain types in the left-hand column. In the last two columns, you'll see the adjustments terrain has on combat for the attacker and the defender. For the defenders for the counterattack. Notice the effects are mostly adjustments made to the die roll the attacker and the defender will make to determine enemy losses. For example, the defender chooses broken terrain to influence combat. The attacker's die roll is reduced by 1, and no adjustment would be made to the defender's counterattack die roll. In another case, for example, the defender may choose woods as the terrain to influence combat. In this case, the attacker's die roll would be reduced by 2, whereas the defender's counterattack die roll would be increased by 1. These die roll adjustments have a noticeable effect on combat, and players should always keep terrain in mind when deciding on defensive positions and when making decisions about attacks. One more note, and this is about rivers. Let's look again at hex 2006. If this hex is attacked solely from hex 2005, as shown by this arrow, then the river between the two hexes would also affect the combat. This is because a river influences combat only when all of the attacking units are attacking across rivers. If hex 2006 were attacked by enemy units in both 2005 and 2106, then the river would not come into play. This is because there is no river in the hex side between 2006 and 2106. The terrain effects of a river are in addition to the effects of hex side terrain. Let's look again at the case of an attack solely from hex 2005 into 2006, as shown by the arrow. The defender is going to pick woods as the defensive terrain, it being an option due to being in an adjacent hex side to the hex side that the attack is coming through. In addition, the defender is going to get the benefit of defending against a river crossing. This means in the case of this attack, the attacker's die roll is going to get modified by -4, -2 for the woods, and minus another 2 for the river. These adjustments will significantly reduce the losses the attacker will be able to inflict on units defending in hex 2006. For the defender in this case, his counterattack die roll will be increased by 2, +1 for the woods, and plus another 1 for the river. And this will probably mean more losses for the attacker. Let's look at another example. Let's say that we have 2 German units in hex 1512 right here. The 6th Landwehr Brigade and the 1st Reserve Division. The Reserve Division is under a -1 strength marker. That's the yellow counter you can barely see here. And notice too that I've spread the units apart just a little bit within the hexes so that you can see the important details. These 2 German units are going to come under attack by the Russian units you see in the adjacent hexes. The Russians have the 4th and 6th Divisions in hex 1412 and the 1st, 8th, and 3rd Guard Divisions in hex 1513. Let me remove the pieces momentarily so you can see the terrain more easily. Since the attack is coming from hexes 1412 and 1513, the defender has a number of options for defensive terrain. There is clear terrain in both of the hex sides that the attack is coming from, but there is broken terrain and woods in hex sides adjacent to the hex sides that the attack is coming through. So in this case, the defender is going to choose woods as the defensive terrain. Now let's see the units again. The attacker has a total of 22 strength points, 5 + 5 + 4 in this hex, plus another 4 + 4 in this hex. Since woods has been selected as the defensive terrain, the attacker's die roll will be reduced by 2. And let's say the attacker rolls a 3. So after adjustment, it's going to be a 1. On the combat results table, a 1 on the 22 column means that the attacker will inflict a 2 strength point loss on the defenders. The defender has a strength of 6, 2 for the brigade, 4 for the understrength division. This will be multiplied by 3 to determine the column to be used on the combat results table. So in the counterattack, the German is going to use the 18 column. Now let's say the defender also rolls a 3. But due to woods, this is increased by 1. That's the counterattack adjustment. So he cross-indexes 4, the 18 column, and the Germans determine that they've inflicted 3 strength point losses on the attackers. For the German defenders, they're going to have to lose the 2 strength points by reducing both units to their backside strength. So the German player flips both units over and removes the -1 strength reduction marker from off of the division. Remember that we determined that the Russians in this combat will lose 3 strength points. To take this loss, the Russian player decides to flip over the 6th Division in Hex 1412 and to place both the 3rd Guard and 1st Divisions in Hex 1513 under a -1 strength reduction marker. And this is what it would look like after the Russian player takes his losses.